You won't believe how far people will go to protect a view. I thought I was just a regular homeowner, someone who loved his property, his peace, and most importantly, the towering oak trees that had stood in my backyard for generations. But what happened next? What my neighborhood's HOA did to me sparked a battle that tore apart my quiet life and ended in a way no one could have imagined. By the time you hear the end of this story, you'll see why I now walk on land that once belonged to them, land I never even dreamed would be mine. It all started on an ordinary morning, the kind where sunlight filters through the branches and dances on your kitchen floor. I was sipping coffee, looking out the window at those oaks. They weren't just trees to me, they were history. My grandfather planted the first one the year I was born. Its roots had weathered storms, its branches had sheltered birds and shaded children at play. Those trees marked birthdays, backyard barbecues, and lazy summer evenings with my family. They weren't just wood and leaves, they were part of us. But to the HOA, they were an inconvenience. It began with letters. You know the kind. Those neatly printed notices with the HOA logo at the top, filled with language that pretends to sound reasonable but drips with quiet authority. Your trees obstruct the neighborhood's scenic views. The first one read, "Please trim or remove them in compliance with HOA guidelines." Trim or remove. My chest tightened. These weren't hedges or shrubs. They were towering oaks, older than most houses on the block. I thought, surely, this is a mistake. I wrote back, explaining how much those trees meant, how they added value, shade, and beauty. Not just for me but for the neighborhood. I even offered to prune them professionally, keeping them healthy without losing their grandeur. The HA's response. Silence at first. Then came the threats. Weeks later, another letter arrived, this time harsher. Failure to comply will result in fines and enforcement actions. I felt my blood boil. Enforcement actions. For protecting my own trees on my own property. I showed the letter to my wife, and she sighed. That heavy sigh spouses give when they want to be supportive, but can already see the storm brewing. Maybe you should just trim them down a little, she said gently. I know you love them, but is it worth the fight? Is it worth the fight? I asked myself that every night. I knew the HOA had power, but I never thought they'd take it this far. One Saturday morning, I got my answer. The sound of chainsaws shattered the stillness. I ran outside in my slippers, heart pounding, and froze. There they were, hired crews, men in neon vests, slicing into the trunks of my oaks. The HOA president stood nearby, clipboard in hand, arms folded, watching like it was his victory parade. What are you doing? I shouted, my voice cracking. This is HOA business, sir, he said flatly. You were given notice. These trees are in violation. They obstruct views. I couldn't breathe. I begged, pleaded, yelled until my throat burned, but the saws kept growling, wood chips flying through the air like shrapnel. By noon, 3 of my oldest trees lay in pieces on the ground, their rings exposed like scars for the world to see. I collapsed against the fence, tears stinging my eyes. My children came out, confused, asking why the trees were gone. My wife wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "Well, figure this out." But in that moment, I felt hollow. They hadn't just cut wood. They'd cut into me, into my memories, into everything I thought was safe. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with photos of the trees spread out, their leafy crowns captured in brighter days, and then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was grief, but it lit a fire. I thought, they think they can just bulldoze over me because I'm one homeowner against their board. No, not this time. I called a lawyer the next morning. At first, even he seemed skeptical. OA cases are tough, he warned. They've got bylaws, rules, and usually the courts side with them. But what they did? Trespassing on your property and cutting your trees without consent. That's serious. We filed a lawsuit. The months that follow were some of the hardest of my life. The HOA retaliated with fines, threats, even tried to smear my reputation in the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided me, whispering that I was making a scene. Others quietly told me they were rooting for me, but couldn't say it out loud for fear of backlash. Court hearings dragged on. Each time, I had to relive that morning. The sound of the chainsaws, the sight of those fallen giants. The HOA's lawyer tried to spin it, saying the trees were a nuisance, that they decreased community value. But my lawyer countered with evidence, property records, expert testimony about the value of mature trees, even drone footage showing how little the trees actually obstructed views. And then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge looked straight at the HOA president and asked, "Did your board authorize the removal of these trees without the owner's consent?" The silence was deafening. Finally, he muttered, "Yes." That was the crack in their armor. Weeks later, the verdict came down. The HOA had not only violated property rights, they had trespassed and caused significant damage. The judgment, $1.4 million in damages, enough to cover the loss, the legal costs, and then some. When I heard the number, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just sat there, stunned, as the weight of months lifted off my shoulders. But the story didn't end there. Because when the HOA couldn't pay, their land went up for sale. And guess who bought it? The very man they tried to crush. Now, every time I walk that land, I think of those trees. They're gone. But their memory fuels me. And the message I want anyone listening to take away is this: sometimes standing your ground feels impossible, but the roots you fight for, the things that matter, can outlast the chainsaws. This was only the beginning. The day the judgment was announced, the courtroom felt unreal. The gavel echoed like thunder, sealing a truth I had barely dared to believe: the HOA had been defeated. My lawyer shook my hand, smiling for the first time in months. "You did it," he said. "They thought they were untouchable, but they picked the wrong guy." And yet, as I walked out of that courthouse, a strange mix of emotions flooded me. Yes, there was triumph. Yes, there was relief. But beneath all that, there was still grief. The money could never bring back my trees. No dollar amount could replace the years of shade, the laughter under those branches, the way my kids used to swing from their limbs. That night, when the house was quiet, I sat on the back porch staring at the empty space where the oaks had stood. The ground looked bare, like an open wound. I whispered to the night sky, "I hope you know I fought for you." But little did I know, the fight wasn't over. It was only transforming into something much bigger. You see, the HOA had made a fatal mistake. They thought they could pay the judgment and move on. But $1.4 million isn't pocket change. They were broke. They had been mismanaging funds for years, covering it up with fees and fines on homeowners. When the ruling came down, it cracked their foundation wide open. They couldn't pay me. They couldn't even keep their operations afloat. Their assets went up for liquidation, including the land they had claimed as their own, the manicured strip by the entrance, the green belt they bragged about in newsletters, and even the small clubhouse where they held their infamous board meetings. And that's when it hit me. I had the chance to turn their arrogance into my legacy. I bought it. Every square foot. The day the sale closed, I drove past the entrance and stopped my car right at the sign that once bore their logo. The same logo that had been on every threatening letter, every fine, every notice of violation. Now, it was mine. The land, the power they wielded like a weapon, it all belonged to the man they tried to crush. Neighbors were stunned. Some avoided eye contact, not sure how to treat me now. Others approached quietly, shaking my hand, whispering, "Thank you." One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, came to my door with a plate of cookies. She smiled with tears in her eyes. "They fined me for hanging laundry outside," she said softly. "They made me feel small in my own home. What you did, it gives me hope." Her words struck me deeper than the judgment ever could. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every homeowner who had been bullied into silence, every family who paid fines out of fear, every neighbor who thought they were powerless. I decided then, I wouldn't let this land sit idle. I would transform it into something that gave back to the community, something that stood for freedom, not control. The first thing I did was tear down the HOA's sign. In its place, I planted 3 young oak saplings. They were small, fragile even, but they represented something greater. Renewal, resilience, the idea that what's lost can be reborn stronger. My kids helped me dig the holes, their little hands covered in soil. My wife, who had once doubted whether the fight was worth it, stood watching with a proud smile that said everything words couldn't. We called it Freedom Grove. Word spread quickly. Families started visiting the land, walking their dogs, letting their children play without fear of violations. The green belt that was once patrolled by HOA board members now echoed with laughter. The clubhouse, I turned it into a community library and meeting space. Open to everyone, no fines, no politics. Just people coming together. And here's the most unexpected part, even some of the former HOA members began to come around. Stripped of their titles and power, they were just neighbors again. One of them, a man who'd voted for the tree removal, approached me nervously one afternoon. "I owe you an apology," he said. I didn't realize how wrong it was until I saw those stumps. We thought we were protecting property values, but we lost sight of being decent human beings. I looked him in the eye and said, "What matters now is what you do moving forward. The land's open to everyone. Make use of it." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw humility in his face. Months turned into a year and the saplings grew taller. Their leaves spread wide, catching sunlight the way the old giants once had. They weren't replacements. They were symbols. A reminder that from loss can come growth, from destruction can come creation. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth it. The stress, the sleepless nights, the money, the fight. And my answer is always the same: absolutely. Because it wasn't just about trees. It was about standing up when you're told to sit down, about defending the roots of what matters, even when the chainsaws roar. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and crimson, I stood in Freedom Grove watching families gather. Children chased each other, neighbors chatted on benches, and the new oaks swayed gently in the breeze. My daughter ran up to me, her eyes sparkling. "Daddy," she said, pointing at the saplings, "those are our trees now." I felt a lump in my throat. "Yes," I whispered, pulling her close. "They're ours, and no one can take them away." The story of how the HOA destroyed my trees, but lost everything in the process, isn't just about revenge or even justice. It's about transformation. They tried to strip away something irreplaceable, but in doing so, they handed me the power to build something greater. Now, when I walk the land I own, I don't just see grass and soil. I see resilience. I see community. I see proof that when you fight for what you love, when you refuse to be silenced, you can turn even the deepest cuts into the strongest roots. And that's the message I want you to take with you. Never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. Stand firm. Defend your roots. Because sometimes, when the storm clears, you'll find you don't just survive, you thrive.